Welcome back to the Farm for Another project. If this is your first time, I hope you enjoy. So we're out here hanging out with our farm's newest addition. This is a little 2-day-old Boer Doeling, and she is just a little doll. We like to give them lots of attention when they're this young so that they're easier to trim their hooves, they're really friendly with people. Just makes them easier to handle when you get lots of attention when they're this size. So we'll let her go back with Mom. I just want to introduce our newest addition here, and we'll talk about today's project. There you go. Go get Mama. Go get her. So recently I had a lot of orders for cutting boards, which I know the area is saturated, the market's saturated with cutting boards, but for whatever reason, that's what's been selling. So when you're trying to start a small business, you make what sells. So I wanted to kind of take mine to the next level, and I reached out to a knife maker in Texas, and I requested some blank Damascus steel knives, and I wanted an ulu knife and then a butchering knife. And my thought process behind that was I'm gonna make some custom cutting boards, and then the ends of the cutoffs, I'm gonna use those to make matching handles. So it'll be kind of a cutting board and knife set to kind of see if people are interested in that. So I got the first Damascus blade just showed up. So let's head out inside the shop. I'll show you the new blade we're gonna be working with and the very first board, and let's start making stuff. So here's the boards we're gonna be using for the first ulu cutting board. So this is black walnut, maple, and cherry. And then I got one really large piece of black walnut here in the middle that has a lot of sapwood on it, which I just love the colors of that. So we're going to put that right in the middle. I still have to joint these and get them ready, but this is just how I kind of figured out the layout that I'm going to do for them. So the ulu knife, the first one we have, this is the blank. And I don't know if it'll show up, but look at the really cool style of the Damascus in that steel. So I think that's going to be really fun. So what I'm going to do here is I've never done any kind of knife work. I've never made a knife handle, never done any of that. So I'm going to be kind of learning as I go. So what I'm going to end up doing is I'll make the board. We're going to do a nice little bowl carve in here, and we'll get it sanded down. And when I cut the end off, I'm going to set that aside and save it. So then again, so I can have the matching pattern in the handle. Because I've never done handle work, I'm probably going to use a bunch of scrap wood first and do a lot of test fitting until I get everything so it fits just perfect. Because I only get one end cut. You don't want to mess it up. So hopefully this kind of comes together. So let's go ahead and get this thing glued so that we can start designing a handle and get this whole thing put together. Now, if you've been with the channel for a while, you know that I have a Onefinity CNC machine, and then I have a Laser Ore Tour Laser Master Pro big long thing here for my laser engraver. So to kind of help others, I've only been doing this for just over a year. I had zero experience with either of these machines until I actually purchased them and brought them to the house. No design software work, I have none of that. So I kind of figured it might be a little helpful for maybe somebody that maybe you who are watching this video. Maybe there's something you want to learn. I've never done any knife work on handles. I'm going to learn how to make my own handle. I've never done it before. I've never done drilling in and putting in the brass pins. I've never done any of that stuff. So I'm hoping that you'll find it some kind of helpful, that you can kind of learn from my mistakes or learn how I do things, or maybe you can find a better way to do things. So if you don't want to follow along for the whole learning how to do it, maybe you're an expert, you just want to watch the machine. I'll put a little timestamp down here somewhere. You can just skip right ahead through all this gibberish we're going to be going through, and you can just watch the machine and watch all the finished work. For the rest of you though, let's go grab the laptop, let's do some design work, and hopefully we can figure this out. Okay guys, I don't have internet in my shop, so all I'm going to be able to do is just kind of bring you to the main Vectric page, and then I'm going to show you where I found the STL. So if you go to the Inspiration tab, you've got Partner Projects, Case Studies, In the Labs, and Project of the Month. You kind of scroll through all of these until you find the STL that kind of gives you the dome that you're looking for. I can't remember where I found mine, but what I did is I found the STL, and then I imported it. And what I did with this is that I imported it and then brought it to the size that matches the overall length of my blade. And if you go to the 3D view, so now what you're going to do is modify this to fit the angle of that knife. So I've already kind of gone through and kind of got that where it kind of fits the curve very, very close. And then I went an extra ½ of an inch on both ends, a little bit wider than the blade, just so you have a little bit of movement in there. So that's how we get the STL on there. So the next thing we're going to work on is how to trace the handle. So let me go to another page and I'll show you that. Okay, so the next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to start cutting the handle. So what I did is I took a picture of the knife with something that has a dark background, so it makes it easy to trace. Now I'm going to spare you the time of me going through. I've already actually done the trace on this. So if I zoom in, you can actually see, I'll highlight my trace here. So now you can actually see where I've actually traced this with all my vectors. I'll kind of, hopefully there, you can zoom in and see that red line right here. So now what I did is after I have it all traced and I modified all those vectors to really pull those curves in really nice and tight. Then what I did is I highlighted that, and then I did right down here, and you can click on that offset, which is in the very bottom left. If you click on that, so then I took an outwards offset at 0.1 of an inch. So that gives me an exact trace at 0.1. which is going to give me a hair. So as I cut this, I'm going to end up sanding this down to fit the blade, but I want that little bit of extra thickness there just so I have some room to work with. So now that we have both of these done, let's go ahead and get this put on the table here, and let's go ahead and get this handle cut out and do a really quick dry fit. Okay, so I just set the X, Y, and Z axis. We also have this done with just super glue and the blue painter's tape. Seems to work out really nice when I'm doing these cutting boards. Now we only have 2 bits that we're going to use for this. The roughing pass is going to be a 1/4 inch Amana bit, which is already in here. We'll come back and we'll do the final pass with this bullnose bit here, which is a Amana bit as well. And I'll have the links to the description for those bits if you'd like to reuse them. Now what I also did is in my software, I pre-built this so that we're actually going to cut this cutting board. The end is going to be right about here, so I can use all this to make the knife handle be out here on the edge that I would normally cut off, because you can see right here, we got a little bit of planer snipe and all the edges off of it, so I think that's going to be perfect for the handle so I can still keep this pattern. So let's get this started. It says it's only going to take 15 minutes for the roughing pass and then 18 minutes to do the final pass, so let's get it done. Alright, let's get the machine out of the way here. Then we got the blank knife here. Everything fits down in there perfect. Got a little bit of room, it's got a little bit of depth, so anything that's getting cut will stay down in there. So that worked out perfect. So now we got to do some sanding. We'll cut this down the size, and then we're going to take this over and we're going to start figuring out how we're going to cut this handle. So let's go cut this end strip off. Make sure it's all nice and square, and let's get started drilling some holes in the handle. Okay, so we got the board all roughed out. I just cut the end piece off, so now we're gonna get started on the handle. So the first thing I want to do with this, so we have matching handles on both sides for the pattern, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna rip this piece in half. Since this is 1 inch thick, that'll give me a 1/2 inch on both sides to work with. And then I'm gonna glue it back together, so then that way as we carve out the handles, it'll be an exact mirror image on both sides of the handle. But we don't wanna do our test cut on this piece, so once I get this cut down, I'm going to get the exact thickness, and then I'll just get a couple of scrap pieces to make the same thickness of wood, and then we'll kind of get started with a little trial and error to get that all dialed in. Alright, let's get the machine out of the way here. So just kind of looking at this with a quick layout here, that looks perfect. It gives me just a little bit on the outside to kind of sand down and make fit, and it's going to bring it right here. So let's go ahead and pop both of these out, just kind of lay them out on the blade here, see how everything kind of fits. One last thing I wanted to show, and this was the reason for making sure that you are dead perfectly centered. So now all the stripes from this are going to line up perfect, and we'll have a perfect match. Okay, so now we got the board on the laser. I figured while I'm working on the handle, let's get something else done. So we want to be engraving the Raven here on this side. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to run our framing around it to make sure it's going to fit exactly where we want it. It's going to go right to the edge. Now that we're off the laser, you can kind of see we got a couple little charring marks. What I like to do is I just have this little plastic brush, and it just has plastic bristles on it. And I like to go through and just kind of clean out all the engravings here, just to make sure everything, any of the loose wood's going to come out. So this is going to be for the cutting board. I'm going to be oiling it and making sure that everything is nice and clean. So Now that I have all that cleaned out, now I'll come back and I'll hit this with some 320 grit just to make sure that none of these little burn marks are left behind. Then we're gonna dip this thing in oil. Okay, so here's the cutting board. I've already got the sanding done. We've already got the laser engraving all finished on it. But now looking how the knife handle is gonna match this perfectly. And the handle will actually mount up here on the top because I'm gonna have magnets on the back of this so that the knife will actually sit back here. Or I'll have it mount on the front. I really haven't decided how I'm gonna do it yet, but I want it to kind of be a matching piece. So now everything's gonna work out just perfectly. Now I've never used it before, but everybody's talking about it. So we're gonna try this Total Bolt wood honey. It's safe for the cutting boards and everything. I've never used it. Normally I use walnut oil, but it's kind of been all the rant lately. So let's give it a try on this board and kind of see how it brings it out. Well, I have to say, I think that turned out pretty good color-wise. I love that. We'll let that kind of soak in, and then we'll kind of sand it all down, and we'll hit the other side. Okay, so the first couple things we're going to do is I got the handles here and the smooth side that's going to be going against the blade. I'm going to go ahead and hit that on some 150 grit just to make sure everything's perfectly level, and just to rough it up just a little bit to give the 5-minute epoxy to harden up and hopefully hold them in place. But the first thing I want to do is I want to make sure that there's no oil or grease, because these blades were shipped to me, so they did have quite a bit of oil and stuff on them. So I really want to clean this handle, make sure that nothing's going to stick to it. Everything is nice and clean. So now that we have that all wiped down, let's just give these just a real quick, just so I know that they're going to be perfectly flat. And I know I got kind of a scuff surface for them to kind of adhere to that metal. I've never done this before, so I'm just kind of keeping my fingers crossed that this is actually going to work. Got a little rough spot there. There we are. And everything feels nice and smooth. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use the scrap cutout piece to make sure that my blade stays nice and flat. So we'll take the first handle here, again, put it smooth side facing in. Let's go ahead and wipe it off really quick as well, make sure there's no dust on it. So we're going to go ahead and sit the blade, and then this cutoff piece, we're going to sit that right underneath the blade so then I know that I'm level. Just make it a little bit easier to make sure that everything's going to be nice and lined up here. And once I have it where I think it's going to look good, because remember we have 0.1 of an inch wider here with our profile than the blade, so I'm just trying to get it as close as I can, eyeballing at the center. But then the other thing I'm going to need to do is, because these have these lines on them, is the second complication is making sure that my lines line up here vertically so that everything matches. So I'm just doing a quick test fit to kind of see how it all looks. I think that's going to look pretty good. We're going to go for broke. So I'm going to go ahead and mix up the epoxy. I'm going to put that on here, and then I'm going to come back, give that about, it says only 5 minutes. I'm going to give it about an hour before I start working with it again. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to come back through with these brass rods, and this is 1/8 inch thick brass rod. So then we'll take and drill holes through the handle in 2 places, and then we're also going to set these rods in there just to make absolute 100% sure that nothing's ever going to break on this handle. I think it might be a little overkill, but I think a little brass with it, everything's going to look nice. And then to really make this thing pop, we're actually going to engrave the same raven that's on the board on this handle, so that's going to be pretty fun as well. So let's get this thing put together. Okay, so our epoxy's been sitting overnight. Everything seems like it's all nice and hard, so now we get to work on shaping it. But before we shape it, because I want to make sure that the brass pins are going to shape with the knife as I'm sanding everything down, now we're going to go ahead and drill. So I got this 1/8 inch thick brass rod. So I'm figuring I'm going to do 2 pins. I'm going to do one up here where it kind of curves, and then I'm going to do another one kind of towards the back of the handle here. So we get these 2 in it, and then we'll go start hitting the sander and start giving this thing some shape and just kind of rounding it, making it a little bit more comfortable here. know what, I've actually decided before I put oil on this, I'm actually gonna go ahead and I'm gonna go engrave it. So we're gonna add the same Raven engraving along this that we have on the board. So I'll be right back. So here we are, fresh off the laser. So now we have an engraving that's gonna match the large one. So now we can get some oil on this handle, and then we'll get the whole thing put up for display. Sticking with the walnut oil. Gives it a nice finish. Soaks in really nice. And there we are. Let that sit and dry for about 15 minutes here, and we'll get the whole display put together. So there's our display stand, and then here is the board. We got a nice coat of wax on it, everything all shined up, and now we just finished the knife, which matches. We have matching engravings facing the same direction. I'm going to make a little stand for the knife, so the knife will actually sit right here on the base. But all in all, really happy with how that turned out. Now, I do have a couple lessons learned here with the knife. You know, it's really hard to kind of get in here and get really good sanding around this edge and around this edge, at least with the tools that I have. I've kind of talked to a couple other knife makers and see if maybe there's something I can do to make things a little bit easier. But really happy with how they both are facing the same way. All the engravings came out. Finished up. I got wax on everything. Everything really came together super nice. Kind of fun making my own new knife handle. I've never done that before. It's always fun to learn something new, try something new. Hopefully that sells this weekend. I got a craft fair coming up, and this is going to be one of my centerpieces, so hopefully it goes well. Well, thanks for joining me for another video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, feel free to give it a thumbs up. Feel free to share. If you have any questions or comments, please put those down below. I'll do what I can to answer them for you. If you really enjoyed this video, you want to join me for all my other projects, all my other ventures, consider hitting the subscribe button. Again, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you around.